And IMF talks underway to help debt-riddled Sri Lanka. The country is down to just a few days of fuel and months away from concrete relief.
And more on Sri Lanka's economic crisis, Bhavani Fonseka from the Centre for Policy Alternatives in Colombo joins us live. Ms. Fonseka, you just heard they're months away from concrete relief for the people in Sri Lanka. But what these talks will do by the IMF is to bring together, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, bring together the official creditors of Sri Lanka, so those to whom Sri Lanka owes $51 billion, and Sri Lanka also at the table to say how much haircut are they willing to take, how much money is Sri Lanka prepared to pay. So that's the point of these 10 days of talks by the IMF. Does that sum that up accurately?
It does. I mean, today they commence these discussions and it'll go on for 10 days. And the expectation is there'll be some kind of staff level agreement if they can come to an agreement. But there's, I think, a lot to discuss in the next days. Things are very, very dire on the ground. So it's to be seen how much can be achieved in the next 10 days. But these discussions commenced in April when the then finance minister and officials went to DC. So the conversations have been going on for a couple of weeks now. And this is the first time the IMF team is in Sri Lanka. So the next 10 days are critical, but again, a lot rides on the fact what kind of agreement can be reached, what kind of debt restructuring can happen, and how that impacts people on the ground.
Okay, in order for any agreement to be reached, all the creditors have to agree on the same set of terms. Of course, I've heard worries being voiced prior to this that China, which is not Sri Lanka's largest creditor, it owes about it accounts for about 10% of the $51 billion in debt, but it has so far shown reluctance to renegotiate debt with Sri Lanka. If Beijing does not agree to terms for a haircut, other countries will say, well, why should we as well? Is this a valid concern?
It is, and I think this is going to be the critical factor, is everyone going to be on the same page when in these discussions, negotiations continue? And as you quite rightly said, China is not the only creditor. There are others. So it's to be seen if everyone's on the same page. These discussions again commenced some time ago. I mean, we need to remember the new Prime Minister and government took office in May. So these conversations started in mid-May. It's been more than a month of this government, and those conversations are continuing. So really, it's a matter of whether China and the others, like, for example, Japan, China, and India, whether they would also be on the same page. And we need to also remember, while these negotiations continue, there is also this dire need for essential items and getting credit lines open and getting humanitarian assistance to Sri Lanka. So it's not just the IMF talks and restructuring debt, but really addressing also the growing humanitarian crisis and how that impacts the stability of Sri Lanka. So it's multiple issues, but at the end of it, it's really impacting tens and thousands of people in Sri Lanka.
All right, and for Ms. Fonseka, for these people, they can only expect, even if a deal is reached, more pain ahead, because IMF reforms will be contingent on very painful cuts, for example, to subsidies, maybe SOE privatization. These things will be affected. But Sri Lanka needs to see it through. I mean, we're talking about the 17th reform package, but it has had 16 IMF loan facilities in the past. It has only seen 9 through, partially because every time you see a change in government, you see a change in economic policy as well. This time, what are your thoughts in terms of Sri Lanka being able to fulfill and complete this 17th rescue program?
So one of the points we need to recognize is while we've gone to the IMF multiple times before, and as you quite rightly said, Sri Lanka hasn't completed those programs. We are in an unprecedented economic crisis, and we urgently need all the assistance we can get. So Sri Lanka is not in a situation where we have many choices here. So we are really kind of stuck here, and we have to stick to this program if we are to even have any hope of reaching some kind of stability and economic recovery. And as you quite rightly also said, it's going to affect the most marginal and vulnerable communities. So really, what kind of package also comes through? And one of the points we've been, as civil society, been raising is really what is the assistance that can be provided to the most vulnerable? We are in such a crisis mode here. So all of this is very important. But again, the fact is whether there's political stability to continue these discussions, to ensure there is a package and that Sri Lanka is able to meet those conditions. So the questions are, what are the conditions going to be? How is it going to impact the people? And is there going to be political stability to follow through and ensure those conditions are met? So a lot of questions at this moment. There is no guarantee any of this is going to come through. But even if it comes through, how does one ensure that those conditions are met? So lots of questions in Sri Lanka, and it's to be seen really what comes out in the next 10 days and beyond.
Thanks so much for all that. Bhavani Fonseka from the Center for Policy Alternatives in Colombo.